So this is also a tough spot to fill, which is the post-lunch spot. But I hope our discussion on gender-responsive planning and budgeting is exciting and will not make you drowsy. So Ms. Purvi Patnaik was not able to make it today because of some emergency, but we have the rest of the panelists and we're really looking forward to interacting with them. So I'll basically not take too much of a time, but building on the two panels that we've had earlier today, covered a boundary wall and let's say a science lab, but no toilet for girls. And this wasn't an oversight in infrastructure, it was an oversight in planning. And that is where gender responsive planning and budgeting begins, not just with what is funded, but with what is seen, what is prioritized, and ultimately whose experiences also count, whose voices are heard in this journey. But one thing that we wanted to emphasize and start off in this panel discussion was that GTE or GRE, whichever stage we are engaging with, looks very, very different and depends on the context we are working in. And that was also something that came up earlier today. Now, in our experience in Swartaling, for example, we've been working with the government of Haryana, and we reached a stage where we were able to have a co-decided alignment on the government kind of taking up the material cost, for example, of the KGBV schools and the curriculum that we are working in. Not just that, we were also able to start conversations on the training of cooks. These are residential schools where they are fed nutritious food, and you want to bring in an angle of nutrition and gender equity into it. And these kinds of institutional discussions took a lot of time. So these are again quoting our earlier panelists, बहुत धीरे धीरे ये चीजें हुई. And so this was one stage, and then, when we started having conversations with the UP government, we took a very different approach on GT, which was more related to research on systems change. But the government has also been very interested on learning outcomes. And so GT, if you look at only in these two contexts, has looked so different. And that is one of the questions, and the first question that I wanted to pose to the panelists, that you all come from such diverse roles with so much experience. In your current role, have you encountered or contributed to gender-responsive planning or budgeting in education? And if there's a specific example that you'd like to share, an incident or a shift that you may have seen or encountered that stands out. But what we would also love to hear about is talk to us about the range of actors that you work with, whether it's in the government or civil society or academia or communities who have been involved in making it happy. So from outside, it may seem there's one person who's kind of heading this or shouldering the responsibility of gender responsive program. But even within system, there are just a host of actors that you're constantly working with. And if you could kind of shed some light on that. I know Professor Vaidya has to leave quite early. So I would request if you could start and we can take it from there.
Thank you so much, and thank you to this wonderful gathering. Thank you for the invite. Actually, I would rather take this question a little differently. I am not actively involved in policy making. I'm a teacher. I work in IGNOU, at the Faculty of Interdisciplinary and Transdisciplinary Studies. And my research interests are actually in the fields of disability studies and gender studies. So what I'd really like to flag here is that in any discussions on gender responsive, education or gender budgeting, we find that the issues of girls and women with disabilities usually gets left behind. And there is this kind of a disjunction between these two categories of marginality, even though they are such important intersecting ones. And I think any discussion on gender really cannot proceed without looking at intersectionality. And disability and gender intersectionality is something very, very critical. And I do prepare teaching materials. I work in a distance learning university. And a lot of the work that I'm doing, a lot of the programs, a lot of the courses that I'm involved with right now center around disability and gender. So this is really where I come from.
Actually, just a quick follow up on that. In your experience, a system that is known to treat disability and gender and education as siloed topics, whereas they are deeply intersectional. How do you work with a system like that, and how do you also work the system that is geared in a very different way?
So, to continue the story that you started the session with about a toilet not being budgeted for, I'd just like to add another aspect to it. Would a toilet also be disability friendly? Would it, accommodate the needs of, persons with disabilities? And to take this point of the toilet even further, I think that as a very, very important symbol of what it means to be disabled in our society, wherein girls and women, their participation in the social world, their participation in the outside world, whether of education, employment, etc., is so limited by the fact that the facilities, the environment is so actually inimical to their needs. So I think that is something very, very important that we need to talk about. And the silos that you were speaking about, oh, absolutely. So I'd also like to mention that I myself am a parent of a man with autism who's now 28. And I think through the entire journey of education and so on, we find that disability tends to be this kind of a category which is, it's just something that is an afterthought rather than being something which is very deeply embedded, which is mainstreamed in the way that we think about anything, whether we think about education or gender or inclusion and so on. So I think the disability angle, and I was very, very taken by the discussion in the previous panel in which the gentleman spoke about how we don't need education for gender sensitization. I think disability sensitization also needs to be front and center. We have great laws. We have, our legal, framework is absolutely rock solid. But what about the ground level awareness or the need for people to actually engage with disability as something that concerns all of us? And unlike gender, disability is not something that is a given. It's something that can theoretically happen to anybody at any point of time. So our reluctance to engage with it is something that I hope will, change over the years. Thanks.
Would you like to take the question now? Actually, last year I was I was conducting a workshop on International Conclave for Women in STEM. So at that point in time, I was having a group of around 40 to 50 students. Mostly they were funded by a private foundation, which we call the Sadhi Foundation in around Tamil Nadu. So I happened to talk with various girl students who are basically, they were from, because those foundations are supporting only students who are having a kind of a low socioeconomic background. So basically, those students, when I actually had to speak to them with regard to technical aptitude, I was just awestruck. Like totally, they were at the highest ranking level, I would say, with regard to the understanding of the basic aspects of STEM fields. But when it came to, I was asking one basic question of why have they joined Anna University? Because that is one of the popular universities, but they were coming from a rural part which is quite close to Trichy, which is another big city. In that particular city, you have one popular institute all of you must be knowing. It is National Institute of Technology, NIT Trichy, which is a popular one across the nation. And those girls were not knowing about the name of the institute, which is very close to their hometown. So I was like, what is happening? They were, because why I had to refer to their aptitude with regard to technical aspect is, obviously if they had taken those tests, they would have got a seat in that particular institute. So basically what is the problem there was lack of information. Though we are saying that they are in one of the best, I'm not trying to degrade Anna University in any way. It is also one of the top universities in Tamil Nadu. But they are actually unaware of the particular presence of that particular institute. So it is all about lack of information. But the same wouldn't have happened with boys.
they would have tried, they wouldn't have got. I'm not demeaning anyone. What it's saying that is because of the way of networking among the boys and way which they talk to themselves as friends. But when it comes to girls, they don't get the actual opportunity to even talk to their friends with regard to all these kind of opportunities which are very much available around them. So it is important thing is all about lack of information, especially with regard to the socioeconomic backdrop. So with that point, I just want to stop at this juncture.
Good afternoon, one and all. Just to give context to what I would say, I'm working at the grassroots level as a subdivisional magistrate, and how gender responsive budgeting can play a crucial role. My story would kind of convey that. So one evening, late in the evening, a girl comes up to me and she picks out a notebook. She scribbles an application and comes before me. When I talked to her, she said that Akshay Tritiya is going to come up and that her parents are, going to get her married. And she was in standard 11, 17 and a half years old. And she was shivering while narrating her story. She came from a remote village of my subdivision. And it was late in the evening. Everybody must have gone back, all the staff. But I felt that if I send this child back home, she may not, have the guts to survive further in terms of standing before her parents, taking a stand for herself. So we mobilized the WCD team, CDPOs and the Thana Prabhari, and we sent that child to one-stop center first. And we also informed our parents that, your child is safe. The next morning when they came, her maternal uncle and her father, it was difficult counseling them. It was difficult convincing them. They were insistent on the fact that ये हमारा घर का मामला है. We would handle it in our community. We are a closed community. We handle all the disputes ourselves. But we were insistent on the fact that, your child will be back. And we waited for Akshay Tritiya to pass. 3 days later, we did rehabilitate that child back in her families after that occasion passed. But it was really difficult. But in this episode, what, I could take was, how did that girl child gather that courage to come before me and to take a stand for herself? And she was ready to part ways from a family, at least for even that short duration. And somewhere, if you reflect, the school awareness programs, the gender responsive budgeting that we are doing today is actually reflecting in the field. And that child was able to take stand for herself. Not only that, government's expenditure on one-stop centers, that also helped us as officials to kind of give a safe space to that child. We cannot take that child to our home, no matter how much we relate to that, how much we want to save her from that situation. But this very gender-sensitive expenditure has facilitated all the district administration in tackling these situations very smoothly in a very legally safe manner. So this is something that I wanted to share and start this session with. Going ahead, I would like to give opportunity to other panelists.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I would just like to start with one of the parallel on which SCRT work, and that is research. So one of the research which was conducted recently and which was funded by SCRT definitely was conducted on classes 5, 8 and 10. And we found that despite aspirations for a better education, many girls were deprived of and they were compelled to sacrifice their dreams of getting the higher education or continue their education. And this was actually because of the traditional gender roles, say for example, taking care of the younger siblings or maybe getting married early or household chores and something like that. So we could we just took this particular thing as a challenge in front of all of us, and then me and my colleagues, as per the SCRT mandate, we aimed to bridge this gap by motivating our student teachers, the budding teachers, to take this initiative and to go to the communities to give their services and to teach these girls, and so that they can fulfill their dreams and they get the chance to continue their education. So they are on their path and they are giving their weekends, going to the communities, going to teach these marginalized
community girls, and they are teaching them. And they're trying to uplift them as much as possible. Along with that, I agree with what Ananya said, that there are definitely huge lot of infrastructural challenges nowadays, that we don't have the running water in many of the toilets. We don't have the, जैसा madam ने बताया, disabled friendly toilets नहीं है. But on the contrary, I also want to share that there are many government related schemes and scholarships. Say, for example, the NMM scheme is there, which is National Means Cum Merit Scholarship, wherein the students get for continuing their education after 8th class, they get yearly 12,000 rupees, wherein they can continue their education. And also there's one more scheme wherein the students in classes, you can say, 5th, 8th, and 9th and 10th, they get the scholarship for continuing their education. And this way, I think the government is also taking a step ahead to help these students and the marginalized girls so that they can continue their education and fulfill their dreams. Thank you.
Thank you all for grounding us in your experiences. Here's what Transform Schools has learned from girls who conducted audits in their school and spoke about being left out in morning assemblies or schools. It's head teachers who paused to see their school development plans to a gender-responsive lens for the first time, and to civil servants who said, we follow schemes. They showed us what's missing. What's missing is the space to reflect, to grasp the issue at hand. Gender responsiveness, they showed us, needs convergent thinking, anchored in adolescents' full life journeys and not just the delivery targets. It calls for an evidence architecture that makes visible how gender intersects across protection, learning, aspiration, health, and transition pathways, so that governance can respond not in silos, but as a system. As we move into the next segment, let's reflect on what it takes for the system to shift, not just individuals or programs. Gender-responsive planning and budgeting often falters not due to the lack of intent, but because accountability, data, financing, and leadership sit in different corners of the ecosystem. So let's ask, where do coordination gaps persist? What helps actors come together across departments and sectors? And how might we build the enabling conditions? Trust, shared evidence, flexible mandates for sustained systemic change. Which brings me to my question to Professor Ava Sharma. What role do SCRTs and teachers play in advancing gender-responsive education, and how can their efforts be better supported?
See, as per if we talk about NEP 2020, so as per NEP 2020, we have that all the SCRTs pan-India needs to collaborate on a few of the initiatives, I should say, and few of the parallels we talk on and we work on. And that is providing a core subject matter related assistance for material development and teacher training. The teacher training includes the training of pre-service teachers and the in-service teachers both for all the educational programs in Delhi, including pre-primary, elementary, and etc. etc. I must also quote in here that whatever the material is being developed, that is being that actually has a gender audit which goes on for all the material whichever is developed, and also for all the training whichever is being conducted in Delhi, we ensure that whatever the pedagogy training is there, whether it's mathematics training, or whether it's training for PGTs of whatever the subjects or the disciplines, we ensure that at least one session on gender is being scheduled in that particular training. So that is a mandate and we follow that. Along with that, we lead the design, planning, and delivery of all the statewide in-service teacher training program in coordination with PMU, in line with Directorate of Education's annual priorities, local needs based in-service teacher training. And that has been planned and delivered by the diets, as well as we have got an inset cell wherein we have the annual calendar, wherein we schedule the annually what all trainings and on what all subjects and what all topics we need to cater, and that has been delivered. It is already there in the annual plan. Along with that, we carry on action research projects in the field of teacher and school education that is striving to be, rigorous, relieved, and innovative. And we try we try that for any of these funded projects, if we can hire any of these project assistants or research associates or research assistants. So that's the way we try to mitigate all these things. Thank you.
Thank you for throwing light on how gender is mandated and what measures are being taken in helping teachers. My next question is to Ms. Archana. How does the last mile implementation of key skills shape up, especially from the view of convergence?
So basically, I would like to explain the last mile implementation part by an example. We've all heard of the scheme Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, as it has completed 10 years this year. And one of the objectives of this scheme is to check the dropout rate of girls, particularly in secondary and higher secondary school education. As we deduce, it is a scheme where we require convergence not only from Women and Child Development Department, but also education and health. Comprehensively, we are going to address this particular objective of the scheme. So what are the challenges that we find at the grassroots level? I'd break it in 3 steps that I've observed so far in my nascent stage of the career. The first is that at ground level, we follow a very rudimentary approach. So whenever we have to implement something, we have to deliver something, we know that the cadre that we have, the Ashas, the Anganwadis, the teachers, and the ANMs, we will have to look from their shoes. We'll have to put in, ourselves into their shoes, how they understand. So generally, the traditional way of doing things in the government is creating master trainers, someone who are really sharp amongst them, and we create those master trainers by training them, whether it is state level or by, with the help of organizations like several of you, and other also inputs from civil society. So once those master trainers are created, we further percolate that understanding and the training to the entire cadre. Because when you're going to, let's say, teach someone, let's say when you're going to teach an Anganwadi, how she can deliver gender equitable content in that ECE classroom, the Early Childhood Care Education Program, how she can leave the prejudices and the stereotypes that she may see in her home there itself and be very gender equitable while she is, conducting any activity in that Anganwadi. It is a very nuanced thing, it is a very micro thing, and that can come only by training and by capacity building. So targeting this rudimentary approach and enhancing it in a manner that we are able to deliver quality at the ground level is first. And it can, it can span across schemes, across convergences. The second aspect that I find that is important is leadership priority. So if a particular scheme is the priority of the head of the district, it is the priority of the head of the public representative of the area, it will definitely percolate, because this will be continuously reviewed. And how can somebody, improve their review? By designing schemes which has the ability to collect data while it is implemented. So it gets easier for the head of the district to review it periodically and to kind of see the quantitative change. But the challenge with gender equity is that it is a very qualitative aspect. One cannot maybe put in numbers to it, which is where directly reviewing a scheme from this angle gets challenging. And I'm sure with inputs from research, we will be able to add value to this. So this is the second, aspect, the leadership priority. Another aspect that I am going to talk about is flexibility when we talk about convergence. So it can be a tribal district, it can be a predominantly urban district or a rural backward district. So we'll have to provide some flexibility for the last mile and not keep everything rigid in the first place for the scheme, so that when you give funding to in that scheme, there is some flexibility to spend. I'll take example from the district I'm posted, Shajapur. So we got around 20 lakh funds in Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao scheme, and some of it was flexible, as in it was untied. And when we observed that there were hostels of girls and it had good enrollment, we chose to give computer systems with internet connectivity to those hostels, because girls are not allowed to keep mobile phones or tablets, but they need education content, so they could download, they could take out time, they could download, print out and study. And this actually helped, and we've got positive feedback so far. Another instance was that there were girls who used to, aspire for learning this life skill of four-wheeler driving. So there was a demand, and we collaborated with the youth or sports department of the district, and we were able to arrange the same for that. And this also gave a very positive feedback. So these very, little things, but kind of towards gender equity and women empowerment, these steps helped a lot. So flexibility when we talk about convergence is also required. So I'm just summarizing the three things that I've observed in the field. First of all, we think in a very rudimentary manner when it is about ground level implementation of a scheme. We'll have to put ourselves in the shoes of that Asha or the Anganwadi who is coming from a lot of stereotypes and prejudiced society and home, and yet she has to deliver very gender equitable content in the Anganwadi center or the classroom. So we need that kind of capacity building for her. We need to invest in that. We need to budget for that. And the second aspect I talked about, of course, the leadership priority. So if the local public representative, he is, at any event, he's giving importance to young girls by the program of Kanya Pujan, that reflects, that women should be, a girl child should be prioritized. And slowly this gets into the common public, and that reflects maybe at a later stage, couple of years down the line, it can help improve the child birth ratio at sex ratio at birth. So these were the two aspects, and the third that I talked about was flexibility and convergence. So I believe that if these three things are taken care of, the last mile implementation of a government scheme can really go a long way. And of course, the support of from the scheme design to the implementation part has to be taken in a very rigorous and a very, from very policy perspective as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Archana ji, for throwing light on the three different ways, which is the rudimentary approach, be it leadership or the flexibility, convergence that is needed, especially in the last mile delivery. Our next question is to Dr. Angayar. If we are looking at schools as the first public spaces that girls are navigating, are we thinking of education as part of women's safety?
So first, I would like to just quote yesterday's thing from the Wimbledon winner, Sinner. He has mentioned that success starts here. He actually, after winning the Wimbledon, the first thing that he visited was his school. He went to the school and gave the entire Wimbledon money that he won. I think it's close to 63 million euro, if I am right. So he has given the entire money to the schools, and he has just one message stating that every success starts here. So we are hitting the right place to make any kind of big changes. So here, when we are talking about the schools, the first thing that I would like to highlight here from Tamil Nadu perspective is Chennai is the first city to have a thing called Gender and Policy Lab. So basically, what they were trying to do here is, it is all about the innovative things. Say, for example,
if you're talking about the safety aspect, we are trying to actually geotag all the regions and just find out which places are well lit, which is having issues. So when a new person is visiting a particular place, they will know whether this place is a safe place to just walk around. Say, for example, a girl from a rural city can come to a place like Chennai to attend an interview. She might not be doing anything, knowing anything about the city. So that particular map will show her or will give her an idea about the safety of the city. So that is one thing that I would like to tell. And apart from that, before getting into the actual problem, I just wanted to highlight few things that are being implemented here in Tamil Nadu. We have a scheme called Pudumai Pen, wherein we support girls with 1,000 rupees per month. So this actually has shown a greater impact with regard to the gross enrollment ratio in the last year. So basically what is happening is, since they are getting this particular scholarship every month, 1,000 rupees, students automatically, they are not breaking their studies. The parents are actually motivating the students to go to the school. So this is one scheme that I want to tell. And also recently we have started trying to implement CCTV cameras across the school, so that if that monitoring system is there, at least some kind of guarding is there for everyone, whoever is there in and around the school. And also we are trying to provide female attendance in all the female buses with regard to the school education system. See, these are some of the schemes that I would like to highlight. And apart from that, Tamil Nadu has also launched a state women policy. I think it is also kind of a new kind. I'm not seeing this in any other state. Maybe one or two other states might be having, but this state women policy is a new of its kind here. And through that state women policy, we are trying to address 4 important aspects of women. One is, how are we going to mentally, emotionally empower them, and also with regard to the critical empowerment and also economic empowerment. So we are focusing on 4 pillars through which education is one of the key aspects. And in this particular aspect, what we are trying to focus among various other features, the thing which is very close to my heart is a STEM field. As I was just mentioning, STEM field, basically if you see, if you are roughly targeting about like 50% of women population, right from population to GER ratio, even there it is very close. I think in most of the states, and somewhere it is more equal 50-50. So all of them are getting graduated. They are also coming out with the graduates. But what is happening with regard to STEM field is, from 50%, it is drastically getting reduced to 12% of women only get into STEM fields. So basically, if I have to top this with regard to 2 different aspects, like from top to bottom approach, if I have to say, I wanted to recall that the biggest ever prize is a Nobel Prize for STEM field. So that Nobel Prize, if you see globally, I think 95% of the Nobel Prize winners are male. It is only around 5 to 6% of the Nobel Prize winners are female, till date I would say. And interestingly, if you want to recall who is the last Nobel Prize winner from India. I'm asking about science, Steve. I'm not talking about economics or other fields.
Economics you have.
Yeah, economics we have. It's yeah, there's economics, but I'm talking about STEM field. It is only C.V. Raman, one and only person as one. And we are yet to open even the ticket for women Nobel Prize winner. But unsurprisingly, because even in the global platform, from the developed world in itself, we have only very less women percentage of Nobel laureates. So basically, this is one of the fields, actually I would say, since this is being a co-edition, at India level, we have to launch a program just to sensitize women to enter into STEM fields, so that we at least have some kind of awareness to the females, stating that it is not just about taking a job. It is not about getting into a sector like emerging sector or any kind of science sector. They have to, because when you just ask the girl, what is your dream? They may say, I want to become a pilot. I want to become a scientist. And so on and so forth. But none of us, or even as a nation, we are not thinking how exactly to push the young minds towards achieving which is biggest. And if you're talking about Max, which has Abel Prize and few other top prizes during a monologue, even in that, we have not opened a ticket at all with regard to the female representation, which is actually a sorry state of affairs, especially in India, because India is not a place of depth of knowledge or depth of information. But it is all about how we are going to channelize their thinking. How are we going to actually tickle their mind? It's just all about that. So if you're talking about from top to bottom, it is at the leadership we have failed, I would say. If you're talking about from bottom to top, it is all about how exactly the information is reaching even at the ruralest of the rural place. Because all the information are scattered. So it is about how are we going to take it to the real rural place. So these are the two things that we actually have to connect and see some kind of results, at least in the forthcoming years.
Sorry, I just wanted to add on what is actually is coming up now with respect to NEP 2020. So all the gender concerns will be covered in a 3-day capacity development program with respect to NEP 2020, and all the schools of Delhi, say for example, Directorate of Education, NDMC schools, MCD schools, they are nominating one of the nodal teacher from each and every school who will be taking care of implementation of NEP 2020 further. Thank you.
I just wanted to add a couple of points on that. Basically, we are talking about, especially with regard to women empowerment, it is all about financial literacy, and these days digital literacy and legal literacy. These are the 3 important key areas which we have to focus. But even our NEB is not talking about all these 3 aspects, if I understand correctly, because financial literacy is not there. I've seen that. Financial literacy is to be part of any kind of an empowerment. It is only about value of money teaching, especially for the current generation. The value of money has to be taken very seriously and it has to be passed upon. So financial literacy is one key thing which we have to focus, whether you're going to get into employment or if it is going to be an entrepreneurship, because the first thing that is all about entrepreneurship is risk aversion. So once if you give some kind of clarity about the value of money, how it is coming, how it is to be generated, how it is to be saved, if that is covered, at least they will take that particular risk of getting into the entrepreneurship ecosystem.
Definitely, I'll just try to say a few words on that. Interestingly, we have one of the initiative of Government of Delhi, that is NEEV, wherein which was named as Entrepreneurship Curriculum Framework previously, but now it is named as NEEV. So wherein we give a lot of funding to these young entrepreneurs, and I think many of the school students, they have changed and they are now earning like anything because of this initiative. So I think that if the government has seeded this NEP 2020 and if they are envisaged huge lot of things with respect to this policy, they will definitely fund for that also. So thank you.
Actually, the policy covers 21st century scale. Yes, so if it does, then it covers everything, digital and everything that she spoke about. Yes. Reference is different.
Great. So what we are seeing is, I was just trying to take some notes, but gender responsive planning and budgeting is a long-term process. There are aspects of resources that was brought up earlier today, aspects of leadership priorities, policies and schemes, information dissemination across the board. And given where we are right now, I want to be more forward-looking and talking about aspirations and opportunities. And so where you sit in the system, whether it's policy or practice or research or advocacy, what is one big opportunity and one big aspiration you see for making education systems gender responsive? And you can go in any order.
Since you touched upon the point on this information dissemination, what we are trying to focus on is we've been taking an informed decision. So at school level, what we wanted to do is we wanted to actually have a kind of an assessment based on their aptitude and also aspiration, because basically what is happening is immediate of gender agnostic. What is happening is mostly it is hurt kind of a mindset wherein a group of students from whichever school they are coming in, like if their friends are joining, say for example, this year automobile engineering is in the peak, they tend to join automobile engineering or any other stream for whatever stream it may be. So instead, actually it has to be based on individual's talent, on individual's aptitude, which is not be actually even thought through, because either at parent level or at teacher level or as an individual, as a student level, we don't think through in those lens. Say for example, if I'm very good at mathematics, I should know which course will align with my actual natural talent and also my passion.
So that is why I have to end up. But what is happening here is, if engineering is popular, we tend to go to engineering. If any other stream is popular, we tend to go to that. So instead of that, we wanted to girls to take an informed decision through a particular assessment, wherein their aptitude and their aspirations are mapped, and they are given a kind of a repository of information, whatever best institutes are available, whether it be locally or within the state or outside the state or even globally. That is one thing which we are just thinking through.
So as Ananya mentioned, what's the wildest aspiration? So at this point in time, thinking through the gender lens for young girls, I feel that if I am able to institutionalize real-time data collection of classroom participation metrics, which is gender disaggregated, that will give me insights about what are the factors that are creating this problem of access, and also the bias that we see in the system. So if I'm able to get insights from that data, and if I'm able to channelize those loopholes or those holes and plug in, that would be my wildest aspiration today. And the second thing that I'd like to also talk about is, in the last panel, somebody mentioned that in the government, sometimes people are just busy. I would like to mention that, yes, we are busy, mostly with the routine work. And one of my senior once had said that follow 80-20 rule in life, give 80% to the routine work, but also take out 20% of your time in something fruitful, something that you want to contribute to the society. Pick up anything in different positions that you hold along your career. So I'd like to follow that, and I'd like to listen to many of you and collaborate with many of you for the society. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. So if I see from the perspective of SCRD, I see that the biggest opportunity in leveraging teacher education as a transformative tool, and if we prepare the teachers, the future teachers, not just to teach their pedagogy, but to advocate for gender equality, and they can influence their classrooms, their families, their communities. And that's the way I think my deepest aspiration is to definitely ensure that each and every child should get the opportunity to learn, to get the education, and they should not compromise with respect to their dreams for the future. And definitely, the opportunity lies in collaboration with a lot of policies, a lot of government initiatives, and got a lot of challenges which we have to face. But then I think that we can navigate through each one if we are passionate enough to do that. And most of all, I just wanted to quote that I believe and we aspire to create the education system that embed the gender equality principles into teaching practices and teaching reforms, and definitely the real potential in accelerating the progress towards equity and inclusivity and potential transformation education, thereby creating a reflective and humane teachers. So thank you very much.
Thank you to the panelists for those rich insights from the Indian context. Before we go ahead to hear about the global perspective, I would request the audience to also think about what are the opportunities and what are the aspirations that you are taking from the positions where you are, and you are seeking in terms of this gender responsive budgeting and planning. With that note, I would like to invite Ms. Zainab, who is the program manager at UNGAI, to share her views on gender responsive education sector planning and a global perspective drawn from their work, working in 8 countries from Africa. Zainab, over to you.
Thank you, Asanya. Thank you so much. It's an honor and privilege to be part of this panel, and I want to thank wholeheartedly to Swatali and Transcon Schools
for holding this space for us. And I'm really honored to be joined and be part of this panel. I think I want to circle back a little bit to the discussion of this morning around gender transformative education, because what we heard during this panel is exactly what gender transformative education is. Applying gender responsive budgeting to not to forget toilets for girls, capacity development for teachers, disability inclusive education, teaching a girl to stand up for herself, identifying unsafe and safe spaces, safe areas within schools in the city, carrying out gender audits. So all this is about gender transformative education. So we should not mystify too much what these terms are. It is as simple as that. And we need to be able to unpack these terms so that we are able to explain to those who are not very familiar with our space, right? Because we are sometimes confined in our own spaces, the gender equality and education spaces. And we have challenges in communicating and passing through the messages that we want to convey. So this is as simple as that. So this takes me to the notion of gender responsive education sector planning, which is also an element of gender transformative education, and which also seeks to utilize and apply gender transformative education, the gender transformative leadership for education. And this is who I believe, strive to be education transformers and good leaders who want to transform a gender education space. So GRASP, in short, is a whole system approach to advancing gender equality in higher education. And meaning a whole system approach, we are talking about the learning environments, the classrooms, the teacher education and practice, the curriculum and the materials that we develop and use in education. And gender responsive education sector planning is actually it's a vehicle to identify and understand gender barriers to the education systems and to ensure that we have the right approaches, the right strategies to address inequalities within the education system. So both UNGAI and UNICEF have been applying the GRASP approach over 10 years now. And the GRASP approach, and these are mostly organized in the form of workshops with the participation of government officials, civil society, young feminist activists, gender experts. So it's not only targeting government officials. And it really helps these partners to understand and apply core principles of gender equality in their work and increase their commitment to this mission. So GRASP is also about increasing demands for gender equality in higher education, increase curiosity, increase commitment, increase the desire to do something for gender equality through education. So this is what GRASP aims to bring. And it is also targeting actually not the gender experts themselves per se, but those who are not very familiar with gender issues. So it is also about increasing and soliciting interests on the side of those who are not necessarily familiar or who don't claim to be gender experts. So this helps GRASP can support. And we did see good examples of GRASP doing that, not only creating curiosity, but also achieving good results. So the eighth country program in Africa that UNGAI is implementing, this is called the Gender at the Center initiative. It's an initiative of the group of 7 countries. And as a result of this GRASP, the gender responsive education sector planning, and combined with a training around gender transformative leadership for education, we have seen good results in a couple of countries, and this is still evolving. For example, in Nigeria, one of the biggest states rolled out youth-led school-related gender-based violence framework to 20,000 schools after receiving this support. In Mali now, there is a 5-year budgeted gender action plan. And speaking of Mali, this also shows the power of these initiatives to work even in most difficult contexts, politically difficult contexts. In Sierra Leone, again, there is now a gender-responsive education sector plan, which is fully funded. And the same exists in Mauritania and 3 big states in Nigeria. And in Mozambique, now there is a teacher's code of conduct on school-related gender-based violence. So success is possible. But of course, all these policies and all budget plans, even if they are budgeted, they need to be implemented and monitored against accountability. And a couple of recommendations that we have received while implementing GRES in these countries is that, as I was saying, it's very important to engage people who are not experts, but also people who are close to money, who are close to financial resources, who are close to planning, who are close to monitoring and evaluation, and who are also close to the other gender-sensitive planning mechanisms, like when it comes to preventing GBV, when it comes to women's employment. So not only confine yourselves in the education space. Engaging with civil society organizations and young people, this has proven to be successful, but it's not enough. It has to be extended and it has to be intentional and non-tokenistic. This is also what with this coalition we are trying to do, avoiding being tokenistic, and this is the case in whatever we aspire to do. And this is also something that we need to continue to apply and remind ourselves of when we apply GRESP. And finally, do not have the GRESP initiatives as standalone activities or as standalone initiatives, but try to embed this perspective and the capacity development, institutionalize this in the official government's mechanisms, in the pre-service trainings and the in-service trainings. So making it institutionalized would give it higher chances of being accepted and applied and be more sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you, Zainab, for giving so many exemplar examples from RESP and also the recommendations. In the interest of time, we might not be able to take questions from the audience. However, all the responses you have written for the opportunities and aspirations will be collected by us, and we are planning to collect those. Also, that is how your voices are going to reach us.
You mean this?
Yes. Thank you, Anupamji. On that note, thank you to the audience for being so patient with us and all the panelists for keeping it so interesting post lunch. We have heard that gender responsive planning and budgeting is not just about intention. It is about whose needs are prioritized, whose voices shape the agenda, and how policies translate into real change. Our panel brought perspectives from the different aspects they are working to the last mile delivery, showing us while the contexts do differ, the challenge is same, closing the gap between the impact and intention. The message is clear: moving from responsive to transformative means reimagining the system itself to be equitable, inclusive, just for all learners. Let us carry forward these collaborations and the courage we had discussed and ensure every decision we make breaks the barriers. Thank you, everyone.